Right, good afternoon. All right, I want to kick things off with a word association exercise. So I'm going to flash a phrase up on the screen, and I want you to blurt out the first word that comes to mind. Unfiltered. Okay? Unfiltered. Just shout them out, okay? So what comes to mind when you hear the words today's generations? Let's hear it. Entitled. That's just what's top of mind, isn't it? We all could have said that in unison. What else? Technology. Connected. Social media. Amazing. Okay, this is my new favorite table right over here. Global. Give me a few more. Isolated. Interesting. Disconnected. And gamers. Ooh, I really like that one. Okay, excellent. Well, really no right or wrong answer here, but I did bait you a little bit, and you all kind of fell for it. So I know that the theme is Generation Z, but I didn't say anything about Generation Z, did I? I just said today's generations. So we could have thrown out terms about any generation, right? But every time I do this exercise with groups, that always is the case. We're always thinking about the emerging generations, and I think that's just kind of human nature. And I think that's just kind of where we are right now. We're trying to understand these emerging generations because they're so different, right? So that's where we're really heading today. We're going to be talking about who is Generation Z. We're going to be unpacking it. We're going to look at one fictitious example of a Generation Zer, and we're going to walk you through their life so that you can start to understand and visualize how and why they are so different. So as we mentioned in the first session, here's today's big idea. The next generation provides data points into what's next. What's next for your classroom, what's next for your leadership, what's next for your communications, fill in the blank. Now more than ever, these emerging generations give us clues, they give us insights into how we need to think about working in the 21st century. So that's kind of the big picture here, is they provide us insights. So that's what we're going to dig into, and by understanding this generation, we should have a better idea of what we can expect in the future as it relates to working, thriving, leading in the future. So we're going to talk about Generation Z, who they are. Then I'm going to give you four ideas on how to engage them, whether you're interacting them in the classroom or if you're working, if they're soon to be on some of your teams. I'm going to give you four ideas, and then we'll wrap up with Q&A, or I might pepper some Q&A throughout as we go. And don't forget, there's my email up there, rj@ryan-jenkins.com. And then also that link, ryan-jenkins.com/UK. All the slides that you're about to see, all the slides that we covered in the morning are all at that link. So make sure to go check that out. Don't feel like you have to take pictures of the slides. If you're online, don't feel like you need to screenshot all these slides. You can have them at that link. But certainly you can if you want to. So I want to give you a little bit more context on who I am. Some of you heard my intro this morning, but let me give you a little more context. I grew up in Denver, Colorado, so go Broncos, right? We're not having a very good season. It's took a turn for the worse, anywho. But I went to school in Miami University, not too far from here, in Oxford, Ohio, and I studied marketing and entrepreneurship. And ironically, getting a degree in entrepreneurship landed me a job, which took me to Atlanta in 2007. I was in technology sales, and I didn't like work. That became very apparent right away. I didn't like work. I didn't try to avoid hard work. I just didn't like working. But again, I wanted to be an entrepreneur, so I said, oh, you know what? That's just me. I'm going to sweep all this underneath the rug and not worry about it. But again, bumping into a lot of my millennial peers around the country, and they had similar tensions as it related to work. And so I thought, man, there's a bigger story to be told here, and that's what started me reading as much as I could on the topic of generations, specifically millennials. And then I began, I interviewed hundreds of millennials on how they approach career, what they think about learning. And then from there, we launched a blog in 2011, and we began writing about these differences across generations, and that got a lot of traction. We then launched a podcast where we interview Fortune 500 leaders and just thought leaders in the space of generations. And so we really peel back the layers and discover some actionable strategies on what we can do to really communicate across generations, work effectively across generations. And then that all led to me starting to speak more on the topic. And then 2015 began writing for Inc. magazine on the same topic of how to lead, engage, and sell across generations. We've had some luck of just working with some tremendous clients all across the country in every different industry, right? I mean, this is a pain point, right, is understanding the emerging generation. No industries, no institution is immune to it. And that certainly has showed up in the clients that come knocking at our door. 2016, we launched a product. It was a digital learning product that allows millennials to perform better at work. So we had a lot of folks coming to us saying, hey, I wish millennials knew how to communicate better in this form or fashion. And so we created specific trainings to help them in that area. So we learned a lot about what does it take to, how does this emerging generation want to learn? How do they want to consume information? So that'll come up in our discussion today. We wrote a book in 2017, and last but not least, that is my young family. I've got a 2.5-year-old and a 4-month-old at home. So, and we still live in Atlanta, Georgia. So enough about me. I just want to give you guys a little context on where a lot of this research comes from, and let's move forward. All right, for those that were in the morning session, you know how this goes, but for everyone else, if you weren't there, I want you to pull out a mobile device, your laptop, tablet, whatever is accessible to you, and I want you to go to the link that's on the screen there. You see it in the top underneath the question. It's pollev.com/livepoll. pollev.com/livepoll. Those folks online, you can participate as well. And once you're there, you'll simply see this question, and you just tap or click whatever response you believe to be correct. So I want to get you guys warmed up to the technology, but I'm also interested to see what the makeup of the room is, and for the folks watching online as well. And Generation X is the clear winner. And normally, if this is live, like if I click over and it's live, usually it's Millennials or Generation Z that come shooting out first, because they're already on their mobile device, right? They just need to toggle over and chime into the poll, and then they're back to Snapchatting for the rest of the session. Well, very good. So it looks like we got a good mix here. Excellent. Mostly Gen X. All right, let's keep moving. So here's a snapshot of the generations. The middle column you see is done by age. And then the right side, that's how large these generations were at their peak. This will look familiar to the folks in the morning. But again, really what we're talking about today is Generation Z, and they're really considered 19 years old and younger. Kind of a quick and dirty hack to figure out if someone's a Generation Zer or not. Ask them if they remember where they were during 9/11. If they don't remember 9/11, they're a Generation Zer. And that is fascinating, right? To think that this next generation will not remember that event. That's a quick and dirty way to pinpoint Generation Z. So before we move on, generations are clues, they're not absolutes. Generations are clues, they're not absolutes. And they're big clues on how you teach, how you lead, how you communicate. So the better understanding we have of each generation, the better we can, or the best we can elude some of the mishaps and friction that comes with the friction that happens across generations. So let's look high level on who the generations are. Generation Z is not represented here because we're going to have plenty of time to figure out who they are in just a few. So builders are shaped by the Great Depression, World Wars, boomers, Woodstock and civil rights, Gen X, Watergate, layoffs, divorce, millennials, 9/11, the Columbine shooting, the internet, Great Recession, and technology have all impacted millennials. Their traits, builders are veterans, structured, loyal, follow rules, individual. Boomers question authority, they're driven, optimistic, efficient, team players. Gen X, latchkey kids, do it my way, self-reliant, independent. And the millennials, they're going to ask why. They're creative, collaborative, very entrepreneurial. Generation X, you were very entrepreneurial as well, and so the millennials really gravitated towards that and ran with it. And we'll soon see that Generation Z has some of those similar tendencies as well. And lastly, their impact message. For builders, it was your experience is respected and valued. For boomers, you're critical for our success. Generation X, do it your way. And millennials, they want to hear that they can make a difference. So it's very clear, right? And I think a lot of us, no matter what generation you are, you can see that different cultural events, different innovations, different social moods can impact a generation, especially during their moldable years. And so that's why you see so many different tendencies and traits across the generations. So for those this morning, you'll recognize some of this as well, but I want to recap very quickly for the newcomers. This morning we talked a little bit about why today's different. And it's not just because the Millennials and Generation Z, they're so different. It's really because we live in exponential times. Things are happening at a rapid rate. The amount of frequency and change that you and I are faced with on a day-to-day basis it's never been this frequent before in human history. And so it's really changed the game. But Millennials and Generation Z, they're just one character in a much bigger story. And the big story is the convergence of technology and the internet as digital natives began growing up. They kind of came of age and helped propel all of the technology that we now are faced with. And this morning we talked about an example where we remembered our first Uber ride and how it was such an effortless and seamless experience. And now that effortless and seamless experience that we've encountered is going to ripple into every other aspect of our lives. But it's happening a lot faster, and it's happening sooner in the emerging generations. And why is that? Why is it happening much sooner and faster? Because if you can't remember what it was like prior to the innovation, it's not an innovation. In fact, it's standard. So for Generation Z, they don't remember a world prior to Netflix, or prior to Uber, or prior to fill in the blank. And so for them, all those things are standard. That's normal. And so that is where their expectations start. So they naturally have higher expectations because it's a different world in which they've come of age in. So that's true of all of us. If you can't remember what it was like before an invention, to you it's not an invention, it's not an innovation, it's standard. And so it's really fascinating how that's changing our appetites, it's changing our expectations, it's changing our behaviors. So yes, the emerging generations are a lot different and they're demanding a lot of change, but the bigger picture here, the much bigger picture, the more important picture is the exponential times that all of us live in is forcing us to change. And so if we just, sit back and say, let's just keep doing everything that we once did, let's keep leading like we once did, let's keep communicating like we used to, that is a slippery slope to irrelevance, right? And so we have to get around that, we have to get over that, and we have to challenge ourselves. And the way in which we challenge ourselves and think about the future is looking at the emerging generations and understanding them really getting a firm understanding of who they are. So why do generations matter? The folks in the room will remember this statistic. 52% of workers say they're least likely to get along with someone from another generation. So that means half of the people you're bumping into that are not of your generation, there's high potential for friction and to not see eye to eye, which can lead to productivity loss, that can lead to communication miscues, that can lead to leadership misfires. But more importantly, as we're talking about Generation Z, 62% of Generation Z anticipate challenges working with baby boomers and Generation X. And only 5% anticipate challenges with millennials. So there is a very clear generational gap between the emerging generations and the established generations. And so if we're not aware of this gap, we'll just continue to feed the gap. So we have to be aware of it so that we can lead, communicate, work, and find ways to navigate through it and close the gap as well. And how we close the gap, really, one, it starts with awareness, really understanding the generations. And then number two is applying specific strategies. So that's kind of really where we're headed today. We're going to be talking about who they are, awareness, and then we'll be giving you some ideas on how to execute some of this. So let's look at, in general, again, who is Generation Z? Well, as we said, they're 19 years old and younger. They're the first global generation. They view the world globally, right? They consider themselves global citizens. Why? Because they have had a 24/7 news feed in their pocket for as far back as they can remember. So they feel very connected to their global peers. And oh, by the way, they were able to jump on an Xbox, put in an earpiece, and game alongside someone halfway around the globe in real time. So it is a global generation. They're digitally dependent. I also call them mobile mavericks, because that is who they are, right? This is the remote control to their life. That smart device is their remote control. And people always say, gosh, the emerging generation, they're so digitally savvy or they're so tech savvy, and I just don't think that's the best descriptor, because they're dependent, right? They don't remember a world where a smart device has been outside of arm's reach. It's typically the last thing they see before they go to bed, and it's the first thing they grab for when they wake up. So they are truly dependent. And they're continuous learners, so this is really good news for the folks in this room. They know Generation Z is going to live, they're going to live the longest of any generation, and they're going to have the longest career of all time that we've ever seen in human history. So they know they're going to have to constantly reinvent themselves, find ways to find new skills, so they're going to have to be continuous learners. So it's something that they just have come to grips with, and that's just a part of their life, is to be continuous learners. 75% of Generation Z wish their current hobby could become their full-time job. And that would, of course, be a YouTube influencer, of course, right? Just to make videos online would probably be their dream. Actually, that is their dream job. Actually, I've seen some studies where that is their number one thing that they're aspiring to. Go figure. 77% of Generation Z rely on tech to help achieve personal and professional goals. I don't think that would surprise anybody in this room. But just know they're bringing that into your classrooms. They're going to be bringing that into the workplace. They're looking for innovative solutions to work better, faster, smarter. So it's just native to them. So it's not something they're demanding. It's something that they're expecting. Over 50% of Generation Z say it's easier or more convenient to chat digitally. I don't think that would surprise anyone in here either. And lastly, 65% say whom they work with would enable their best work. So what I find interesting about Generation Z is you can see it in some of these statistics. They have this kind of blend between high tech and high touch. So they understand the value of working alongside somebody and speaking with them face to face, but they also understand the power and the efficiency and effectiveness of technology. And so we talked in the first session of how this generation could be the first generation to really help us find the right balance between high tech and high touch. And I mentioned this morning as well. It was 2 weeks ago. I was with a group of 300 first-year students at a university, and I asked them, what is going to be your preferred method of communication at work? And 72% of them said face-to-face. 72% they want to communicate face-to-face in the workplace. So again, time will tell if face-to-face means actually in person, eyeball to eyeball, or it might be virtual face-to-face, but it's real time, real sight and sound. So I think it's probably going to be a little bit of both, but I think it's encouraging for all of us that this generation is thinking about those things, and they don't want to lose the high touch of interaction between human to human. All right, so that gives us a good idea of who this generation is. Let's do another poll. Curious to see what you think here. 63% of Generation Z believes blank should be taught in college. What do you think? I think there's a case to be made for any one of these. But the majority is correct. Entrepreneurship is the correct answer. 63% think entrepreneurship should be taught in college. So if you think about entrepreneurship, it's never been easier to be an entrepreneur, right? You can have an idea, you can go down to the local Starbucks, jump online, create a business, have business cards in the mail, first class by tomorrow, and you can market to the world, you can market to really hundreds of thousands of people for a couple $100 via Facebook. So it's never been easier. The barriers to becoming an entrepreneur have never been lower. And so this generation understands that, and so a lot of them are taking advantage of it or want to take advantage of it because they know it's a very ripe time in history. And so to think about this, and I coach a lot of our industry clients and our corporate clients, that not only now are you competing with your competitors to recruit and to draw in the next generation, but you're actually competing with Generation Z's own desires, ability, and resources to be an entrepreneur. So if you want to recruit and or retain this talent, you've got to be thinking about they now have the option to just strike out on their own at whenever they want, right? And so there's a whole other level of accountability essentially kind of built into that. And so we see a lot of this generation who are now stepping into internships. And we even saw it with some of the younger millennials. They'll have a full-time job, but they'll also have a side hustle, is what they'll call it, right? A passion project on the side. And so that's becoming more and more common because entrepreneurship has never been easier. It's never been easier to be an entrepreneur. 52% of Generation Z use YouTube or social media for typical research assignments. 72% want the right to design their own majors. Some of you probably bumped into that. I'm seeing some heads shake. Probably reluctantly shaking, like, yes, that's true. But think about this, and this is kind of true of millennials as well, is this emerging generation had access to the global platform that is the internet, and they've had the option to customize anything that they've ever wanted. And so we shouldn't be surprised that they're coming on campus wanting to customize their majors. And certainly as they're going to be stepping into the workplace, they're going to be looking at customizing their workspace, their job title, their career paths. And so it's something that we need to be aware of. And lastly, 43% prefer a digital approach to learning and find it easiest to learn from the internet. All right, so let's talk a little bit about what's shaping Generation Z. There's 4 factors that we believe. Number 1 is drone parents. No longer are we talking about helicopter parents. We've upgraded to drone parents. I fully expect to be one of those drone parents. So helicopter parents, right, we kind of hovered and we very closely to the children. And now drone parents, now we can slip a mobile device in their backpack and we can track them wherever they go, right? Many of you probably seen this. There's now clothing you can put on your baby to track their heart rate and track if they're asleep or not, right? This is becoming the new norm. And so essentially we can manage or view or parent from afar. So that's the idea of drone parenting. But bottom line here is Generation Z is being taught to take their career in their own hands. Not everyone gets a trophy, and expect to work harder. So we'll talk specifically on how that has been playing out in a little bit. The receding economy has really impacted this generation. These statistics are really interesting. 62% of Generation Z doesn't remember a time before the Great Recession. And Gen Z's parents' median net worth fell 45% during that Great Recession. So you can imagine the receding economy coupled with some drone parents, there was a lot of tough conversations, a lot of tough decisions were made. There was a different social mood as Generation Z was being raised. And we'll talk a little bit about how that's played out and changed their behaviors in just a little bit. They live in a connected world. That's imprinted this generation in a big way. Gen Z grew up during the most accelerated and game-changing periods of technological advancements in history. I mean, it's mind-blowing to think about all the things how quickly things are evolving, and they've just, again, it's never been new to them. It's just what they were born into. And lastly, the millennials example has certainly imprinted this generation. Gen Z is millennials, and of course the millennials have been the most highly scrutinized, most written about generation of all time. So Generation Z has a lot of data on that generation, and so they're going to course correct where they see fit. So let's look at the differences between Generation Z and millennials. So I'm sure everyone in this room has read an article or seen a video or perhaps another conference speaker talking about millennials. So you probably have a baseline knowledge of millennials. Of course, most of them are in your classrooms at this point. So I'm going to use that baseline knowledge that you have, and I want to kind of build on it so we get a better understanding of Generation Z. While the millennials were optimistic, think about it, millennials grew up in an age of abundance, opportunities, all kinds of praise from parents and coaches. So they were very parents who are very straight shooting, skeptical, and they're parenting this generation to say, hey, you really need to take control of your career. You need to, you're going to have to work harder than probably other generations. And so we see Generation Z being a lot more realistic than their predecessors of the millennials. Generation Z is going to be independent versus millennials who were collaborative. If you put a bunch of desks in a room and you asked millennials to arrange those desks however they wanted to, a majority of the times they would arrange those desks in a circle. And so what that told us, what that informed, was that this generation was very collaborative. They wanted to sit in a circle, they wanted to see each other, they wanted to communicate, hear everyone's opinion. So millennials were very collaborative, but Generation Z, they're going to be much more independent, and a lot of that, again, is coming up with Generation X parents, and coming up in a time of the Great Recession, they're going to be much more competitive, and they're going to look at any chance they get to edge out millennials. Private versus public. So millennials grew up in social media. Social media was created by a millennial, for the most part. Mark Zuckerberg of Facebook. It was for millennials, right? Only people in college at that time could have it. And it really went mainstream because of millennials. And they exposed and accelerated social media. And oftentimes we exploited it too, just by posting whatever we were eating that day, right? So we were really just very public with our lives and our activities. But Generation Z has seen that, and they're thinking, I'm not sure I'm all on board with that. So we believe that they're going to course correct and think they're going to be much more private. Security, cybersecurity, privacy is very top of mind for this generation. So we see them, they've been going after more social networks that align with this idea of privacy. So Snapchat, for example, right? That's the fastest growing social network out there. Why there's so many Generation Zers on the platform is because it has time-bound content. So if I post something of intimacy, authenticity that comes with that, and so that's just one example of how this generation is thinking about their public brand, but in a very private way. Generation Z are digital natives, while millennials were digital pioneers. So millennials came of age during instant messaging, online chat rooms, the mobile revolution. But for Generation Z, they were born into that of arm's reach. And so that has fundamentally changed how they view the world, how they buy, how they learn, how they socialize, how they interact with brands, etc. Generation Z is going to be looking for on-demand learning solutions versus formally educated. Research out there is saying that Generation Z is likely to consider foregoing a traditional college or university experience to go work for a company that offers that university-like training. And this is a generation that is very hungry and very eager to start their careers. And so that's something that's rolling around in the back of their head, and why they're thinking this way, and I had some discussion with your colleagues about this very topic earlier today, is, again, they have a front row seat to the millennials, who a lot of millennials are scratching their head going, man, I have a lot of student debt. And my shoelaces were tied when I started my career. And so Generation Z is going, is it worth it? Should I still pursue that, or are there other options? And now, because we live in a connected world, there are more and more educational alternatives cropping up. So of course, this is highly relevant for the folks in the room. And so a lot of the purpose of today is to stretch your thinking, to begin thinking, what does it need to look like for me and this university moving forward? And we can talk about some of those educational alternatives during Q&A if you'd like. But certainly that's what they're thinking, because they're thinking they grew up with YouTube, right? To where if my garbage disposal broke or I have a flat tire, the first thing I'm going to is YouTube to search how to fix XYZ. So it's a very on-demand, just-in-time learning generation. So for them, they're thinking, heck, I want to go to work right away, and I want to be trained on what I need to know for that job. Because, by the way, I'm going to have the longest career of all time, so I'm going to have to be a continuous learner. I'm going to have to constantly reinvent myself, pivot my skill sets. And so they're looking for more of those on-demand learning solutions. And you've seen some of the other alternatives out there. I live in Atlanta, so the one relevant for us is AT&T recently invested millions into Georgia Tech, and they now offer a $10,000 computer science all online degree. And so I anticipate more collaboration with universities and industry for this very reason, that this generation is looking for more on-demand learning. Role hopping versus job hopping. So millennials, you probably read a lot of articles about millennials who would just job hop, right? They would just weren't excited or weren't happy at an employer, and they just had no problem going somewhere else. Well, most of that is because we now live in a connected world where they could hop on LinkedIn or Glassdoor and find a new opportunity, so accessibility skyrocketed, so that enabled more job hopping. But I also think a lot of them are moving into very dated infrastructures and with a lot of leaders that didn't quite know how to engage this generation. But for Generation Z, they're going to be role hoppers. They're going to go into an organization, and they're going to want to spend some time in marketing, and then maybe try out HR, and then end the week in accounting. because they have serious issues with FOMO, right? The fear of missing out. And so for them, they're going to think, I want to try all these different things. I want to round out my skills. I'm interested in all these various types of things. In fact, recently, Taco Bell has been testing out different ways in which they can loan out their employees. So they're having more and more of the emerging generation coming to them, to their leaders and their managers saying, hey, I heard my friend, or I saw my friend on Facebook, and they're working on this new project at their company. I was wondering if I could go help them on that project and then come back and continue my work at my current role in Taco Bell. And this is the corporate side of Taco Bell. And they're thinking, they're getting more and more of these requests, so now they're seriously trying to figure out ways in which they can loan out their employees and have them come back in with a different perspective, a new skill set perhaps, and we'll see how that goes. It sounds like an HR nightmare to me, but these are the conversations we need to start having, right? What does the structure of employment look like with these Generation Zers as they're coming into the workplace? And I also had a recent conversation with some folks on the HR side in SAP, and they are all in on making the organizations more fluid and more transparent so that Generation Z and the next generation can have a better understanding of where they fit and they can move a lot quicker throughout the organization, all with the idea of retaining the talent. All right, global citizen versus global spectator. Well, of course, millennials were highly connected with their global peers, and they were the most global to date at that point, but of course, Generation Z really is viewing themselves as global citizens. And lastly, face-to-face versus digital only. I touched on this a little bit, but early research and even the research I did just 2 weeks ago confirms that Generation Z is looking for more face-to-face communication. And I think that's exciting. I think we could all try to use a generation that is pushing the agenda of face-to-face. So that hopefully gives you a better understanding of the differences between these two generations. We're going to talk about the similarities as well in just a few. So here's another question. Curious to see what you think the answer might be. The question is, what % of Generation Z would rather customize their own career plan than have the organization lay one out for them? All right. Final answers. Y'all are on fire. 62% is the correct answer, 62%. So of course, I shouldn't surprise anybody because again, yeah, they grew up in the customization nation, so they're expecting more control, more customization as it relates to their own career planning and so forth. So let's talk a little bit about some of the similarities between Generation Z and Millennials. First and foremost, customization of their careers, so that we just confirmed it with that last statistic. They're gripped by gaming. Millennials were a generation that grew up gaming, and Nintendo was their game console of choice. And for Generation Xers, it was Atari, right? Atari was the first on the scene. I heard an interesting statistic the other day. Actually, no, I heard a really interesting podcast. The person that created Atari is the same person that created Chuck E. Cheese. Anybody know that? Isn't that random? It's so random. Well, actually, I guess it's not too random because I think the idea was to put games inside a restaurant, so that kind of made sense, but here's your fun fact. Generation Z, they grew up gaming, right? They grew up on Xbox gaming, and gaming, for those that have perhaps been out of touch for gaming, let me give you some context on how big gaming is. The Olympic Committee for the next Olympics are seriously considering if esports should be an official Olympic game. So esports is, gaming. Yeah, some of you are shaking your heads like, what has the world come to? It's a serious conversation. How many of you are familiar with Twitch? Twitch.tv? 3% of you. So Twitch.tv, okay, really get ready to scratch your heads. Twitch.tv is a website where you go and you watch other people game. Some of you are like, why would you do that? Wouldn't you rather play the game yourself? Twitch.tv is where you go and you actually watch other people game. And I think it was over 2 years ago that Amazon bought Twitch.tv for $970 million because there's such a market for it. We game because gaming is so immersive, and it engages the end user, and so gaming is exploding. So there's a lot of really interesting things we can learn on how to engage Generation Z, whether it's in our classrooms or in the workplace, if we understand the elements of gaming. And so if we have time, we can talk about some of that, but that's something that Millennials and Generation Z share, is this affinity for gaming. They're motivated by meaning. So if you think about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, millennials really have looked for more fulfilling and meaningful work because they've been climbing, they're standing on the shoulders of the generations that went before them, and they're looking for more belonging, more self-esteem, more meaning in their work. And so Generation Z is kind of right there with them. They're really kind of growing up in this age of abundance as well. And so they've kind of climbed the ladder in Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And so they're also looking for more meaning at work. They're committed to contribution because, again, they had access to the global platform that was the internet. So they've contributed at a very early age, and they're pulling that into the classroom. They're pulling that into the workplace, and they're wanting to contribute right away. I can't tell you how many times I had leaders come up to me and tell me that millennials, they want to be the manager or the president or a senior VP within a year of joining the organization, which just isn't likely. But it was really stemmed around this, that they want to contribute. They want to have an impact quickly. Transformation of training, how they consume information, how they learn has changed. And how they want training inside the organization has changed. And so Generation Z and Millennials share that. They want more relevant, more updated, refreshed training, shorter, more condensed, micro, on-demand, mobile. We'll talk more about that in a little bit. They're devoted to development, both as generations. Perhaps one of the biggest levers you can pull when it comes to retaining emerging talent is development. Continue to give them opportunities to stretch themselves, learn new skills. So development's a big key for both these generations. They're freed by feedback. They want more consistent real-time feedback. In the morning keynote, we talked about a strategy on how to deliver feedback and why millennials want a lot of feedback. And it's going to be the same case for Generation Z. They're going to be looking for more real-time, frequent feedback. And they're going to be compelled by coaching. It's the number one leadership style that resonates with both millennials and Generation Z is coaching. So again, this is a generation that doesn't view, I don't want to step on a few of my next slides, so I'll end my comment on that one. More to come. And then lastly, they're empowered by entrepreneurship. We talked a little bit about that, why entrepreneurship is so prevalent and why it's so sexy right now. So that gives you a good sense of, again, how they're similar. So there's going to be a lot of differences, but with every generation, the generation before them carries on some of their traits and tendencies, and then they gain some of their own values and expectations and traits as well. So let's talk about the evolution of Generation Z. So I'm going to look at one specific individual, and we're going to step through their life so that you'll have 10 takeaways on who this generation is and why they think and behave the way that they do. Before I do, though, what questions might we have? Will we have questions online or no? No? Okay. Yes? Right. Right. Yeah, good question. So for those maybe there that didn't hear the question, it was centered around the idea of meaning. How do we essentially, how do we tie, how should I rephrase this? Yeah, how do we engage them in their own meaning making, or how do we tap into their desire for meaning to really engage them as employees or students? I think the biggest thing is communicating the why. Why does the organization exist? Or what's the why behind the team or department? And if you can get crystal clear on what that why is and promote that why to them, I think too often we're not clear ourselves the why behind some of the work we do, or really the end result. Who's impacted by the work that you do, or who's impacted by the team, or who's impacted by the organization, and how is it helping them? How is it serving them? And so if you can get to that, if you can find the meaning in the work that you do or the team that you're a part of, crystallize that and help and put that in front of them. And the other thing that we got to do as leaders is one of the primary purpose of a leader is to cast vision. We constantly have to be casting vision. And if we're not casting vision enough, then that means our teams can't respond to us what the goal is or what the mission is. So we have to be casting and recasting vision constantly because vision leaks. So find the why and can constantly cast and recast the purpose and the why behind the work that we do. So that's how I would tie the meaning into all of it. Hopefully that's helpful. What other questions before we keep moving? Yes. Yeah. Right. Sure. Right. Yeah. So the question is what about some of the folks that are in rural parts of the country, or folks that don't perhaps have a hyper-connected upbringing that we're talking about here? And I would say that more and more those are becoming less and less individuals. This emerging generation, I don't know what the statistics are, but it's a high amount of this generation actually has a mobile that's connected to the internet. And that's the X factor for all of this. If a part of the world is not connected, then of course they're not going to match up with much of what we're talking about here, because they're just in a different, that's a whole new world. But the X factor is connectivity. If they have access to the world's information in a mobile device or some other type of device, they're going to have a lot of these similar tendencies and expectations. But certainly there are going to be some that don't have that experience, and I think at that point they're going to have different tendencies, and that might just have to be handled by more of a case-by-case or individualized at that point. But I'd be willing to bet, but I don't have any research to back this up, that they would be very quick to adopt to all this connectivity that's around them. It doesn't take long for a young brain to kind of grasp onto that and run with it, essentially. So I think, because we do a lot of work with folks that actually hire a lot of folks from very rural areas, and it's shocking to me at how many of them still have a mobile device. I mean, this generation will pay their data bill before they pay their light bill or their water bill or anything else, right? Or before rent, right? Because this is it for them. This is their world. And so more and more, that's why the generation is really similar, is because they do have this in common for the most part. Good question. Yes? Yeah. You saying like coding or creating outputs using technology? I'm not sure. I mean, I think I don't think you have to. I mean, take me for example. I didn't study computer science or anything, right? So all the stuff that I know, it's all been self-taught. I used to create my own websites, and it was just me going to YouTube to learn how to do that. So I would say, while probably a large majority might not have the tech savvy skills like computer science or whatever else it might be, but they definitely have the resourcefulness to go find out when and where they can find that information. So this is a group that has no problem, right, turning to YouTube to find the answer, or saying, hey, I do need to learn this skill, or hey, I do feel like I should have this as a skill set or something I need to improve on. They have no problem on going and finding it and doing a crash course on that learning. So I think sometimes it's up to us, it's up to leaders, it's up to other more experienced individuals to mine the individual to pull out, here's what you're really good at, and here's some of the skill sets that you should think about that could supplement that. So for us to basically turn the mirror on them so that they know what they should go explore, then typically they won't have a lot of resistance to going and finding the learning to improve that skill, if that makes sense. Maybe one more question before we move on. Yes. Right, right. Interesting. So the question is work-life balance. How does it change between the two? I would say, first of all, Generation X you were the trailblazers when it came to work-life balance. Like, that really wasn't a hot topic. It wasn't a conversation until you came into the workplace. And big reason was that you had a chip on your shoulder. You were skeptical of that, so you were thinking, nope, work is in this compartment, and play and life is over here. But we're seeing now, because of the connected world we now live in, we're seeing work and life blend like we've never seen before, right? We're bringing home a lot of work. We're also coming to work with a lot more life. That's why you're seeing so many of these really ridiculous perks that are being offered in certain workplaces. It's not because they're necessarily trying to become a really sexy place to work to attract the next generation. It's because we're more than ever, work-life are blending. So we're coming to work wanting life aspects to it. So I think that trend's going to continue with Generation Z. They're going to look for ways in which they can find smart cuts at work, but they're also not going to have any problem going somewhere else and working from a coffee shop or traveling the world and trying to find some work that way as well. Trying to think if there's any other comments I can give you around that. Yeah, for them, it's not even the word balance won't even really register, right? Because it's not a balance, it's really integration. Work-life integration. If I have some other ideas on that, I might come back. But you might get some ideas as we go through this. So let's talk about one Generation Zer story. We're going to call her Jennifer Zahn. We'll just call her Gen Z for short. What do you think? Sympathy, laughter. I love it. Okay, here we go. 1998, Jennifer is born. Gen Z is born. We're going to fast forward to when things get a little interesting, and that's in 2006, and she is infatuated with gaming, more specifically Xbox, and where she's, again, putting on that earpiece, chatting with people halfway around the world. And to her, it's just normal, standard. So here's what we learned from this first phase of Jennifer Zahn's life. Gen Z desire feedback, difference-making, and diverse teamwork. So let's just camp out here for a second. Desire for feedback. Well, that's all gaming is. All gaming is a constant feedback loop where you hit a button, something happens. You touch this part of the screen, something happens. You choose this path or that mission, and something happens. So they've been immersed in this constant feedback loop for as long as they can remember. So that's an expectation they pull into the classroom and into the workplace. They're looking for more of that real-time feedback. Difference making, well, that's why we immerse ourselves in the gaming worlds, is because we want to make a difference. We want to have an impact. We want to have that epic win. And again, of course, diverse teamwork. In gaming, there's no hierarchy, right? You're a team going after a common goal. And so this generation understands better than most that that you can't achieve anything significant singly, single in one person. What's the word I'm looking for? What's it? Alone? Yeah. Okay. I don't think any of us knew the word. Yeah, as an individual, yeah, that'll work. But it takes a team to conquer something truly great. And so that's something that's really we're going to see come into the workplace as well. They're going to be looking for tremendous amounts of teamwork, and they're looking also for diverse teams. And they're not hindered by boundaries, physical boundaries, any type of boundaries that you can think of. Okay. 2007, a couple things happened in 2007. This was when mom and dad got this iconic device. What was it in 2007? The iPhone. The iPhone came out in 2007. It changed the world. It changed the world. It changed how everyone in this room communicates. I don't know if you knew that. 2007, when the iPhone, the original iPhone, hit the market, that was the first year that Americans sent and received more text messages than we did phone calls. Was in 2007 when the iPhone hit the scene. Now, of course, millennials and some Generation Zers were texting before that, right? And we had to do it T9 style. Remember this? Gen Z will never know how hard we had it. So for those that can't remember, T9 style was when you had to hit the same letter like 2 or 3 times to get one letter. Remember that? So let's all make a pact in the room now that when Gen Z comes of age, we can say, you will never know how hard we had to walk uphill both ways, and then on the way home, we were T9 style, 3 buttons at the same time to get one letter. I'm breaking out a sweat just thinking about it. All right, so that happened in 2007. The other big thing, YouTube starts coming onto the scene, starts to make a big impact. And right around this time is when the flip video, remember that? It was like this black brick with a big red button on it. And Generation Z was starting to create videos. So this was their introduction to YouTube. They could start becoming their own content creators, and they were posting on YouTube. So here's what we learned. Generation Z is a mobile, boundaryless, and video-centric generation. The company Cisco predicts that over 80% of the consumer internet traffic will be video by 2019. So that means you and I not only are going to be consuming more video, but we're actually going to be communicating more via video in the very near future. And so that's why YouTube is so prevalent. That's why YouTube is one of the top social media channels out there for this generation. They're very video first. So we'll talk a little bit about video in the engagement piece, the second half of today's presentation. So 2008, Gen Z, she hears a lot about Facebook. She's not old enough yet, but that does not stop her from lying about her age and joining Facebook, right? Because there was so much buzz about it, she thought, I need to join this. And of course, some of you are shaking your head. You maybe had kids or knew of somebody that did that. And so what we learned from this phase in Generation Z's life is they prefer real-time, transparent, and collaborative communications. They were seeking it out as early as they could. They wanted to be part of these communities, they wanted to contribute, and they wanted to just poke at it, right? It was a new innovation for them. 2009, she is now in middle school, and Gen Z, she has access to the world's information via a blank search box. So just for a basic comparison, raise your hand if you had access to Google in middle school. Raise your hand. There's only 4 of you. Keep your hands up. All straight A students? Straight A students? You're all shaking your head. That's fantastic. Let's give it up for them. Straight A students. All right. Good, because normally when I do that, people are like, nope, not me, not me. And then we all shame them. The whole room collectively will shame them because it's like, how did you not get straight A's when you had the world's information at your fingertips? How were you not acing every exam in middle school? I kind of say that tongue in cheek, but really this was a big deal, and this generation was using the World Wide Net and online information to do the legwork of their projects. And in the early days, it was the teachers that eventually kind of caught on to this, and they began copying all of the content of certain students' papers and putting it into Google to see if it was plagiarized or not, right? Some of you are probably in that boat. But here's what we learned from this portion of Generation Z's life. They consider the internet the authority, and they think and approach problems fundamentally different. This was also true of millennials. They were on the front end of this, and they were coming in and not looking at teachers or parents as the authority, but they were looking to the internet. And so that has truly fundamentally shaped how they attack problems and how resourceful they've become. So really pivotal that we understand. This is perhaps the most pivotal point in Generation Z's timeline. 2010, that's when the first iPad comes out, and I use Apple products just because they typically they're a little bit more vivid in our memory banks because of just how well they've done to promote those. So that's why I use these products. But that's when the iPad came out, and then also 2010 was when Instagram launched. That seems like forever ago, right? But Instagram really took off, mostly because Generation Z, right? It was a new platform. It was for them. They could be kind of first movers on this platform, but it also communicated that they are a very visual generation, right? That wants to communicate through visual mediums, and again, we'll talk about that in a little bit. But this is a generation that now they have multiple devices, right? So they might be in school collaborating via Google Docs, and then they jump in the car, they're on a tablet finishing the work, and then they jump home and they're balancing between a mobile device and a laptop. And they were doing all this while millennials were still learning cursive in middle school, right? So it's very dynamic. So how this is going to show up in the workplace, time will tell, but I imagine they're going to be even savvier multitaskers. I don't like using that name or term because I don't think it's essentially true. but they're going to have a very, very deep understanding of how they can use all these different tools to, again, find smart cuts at work. I think this is going to be interesting. I wasn't planning on sharing this, but I think it's interesting. Multitasking, right? That's a term that kind of comes up a lot. Certainly came up right now as we're thinking about Generation Z or Millennials. But multitasking really is false. The human brain can't really process, right? We can't process two things. If I'm playing a game and trying to listen to a conversation, then I can't do both things. So I can play the game and then kind of listen. So I'm essentially what's happening isn't multitasking. I'm and then be like, okay, where was I when this went? Oh yeah, here's where I am. They can do it pretty seamlessly, but they still can't go from one. They're not fully present in one or the other. They're switching it between it really quickly. So I think that's really powerful stuff, and if we can kind of understand that and help this emerging generation that, hey, you're not truly present when you're multitasking. And so we have to, if the goal is to be present, then you need to put away the device, or you need to, choose to be all in with the game or whatever else it might be. Kind of a tangent, but perhaps that's helpful information. So here's what we learned from this point in Jennifer Zahn's life. Generation Z expect and prefer to approach work and learning differently thanks to technology. All right, let's take a quick 1-minute break here between Jennifer Zahn's story. I'm curious to see what you think the correct answer is for this question. All right. Wow. You guys are just acing this today. Yes, the correct answer is experience or event. Experience or event. So that was kind of true with millennials as well. They'd rather put their money towards an experience than a material good, and so that's why there's been this minimalist movement for a long time among the millennial generation, and that's mostly because, again, why do I need all these things when I have the world right here? So I'd rather go put my money towards experiences and then blog about it or take a bunch of selfies and tell all my friends about it. Okay. So back to Jennifer and her story. 2012, she's now in high school, and she's really interested in anonymous or incognito social networks. So she's been a part of social media for a while now, and much like the millennials as well, they began to have a fatigue for social media because of the superficiality that came with it, right? Everyone's putting their best foot forward on social media, and it just doesn't feel as authentic as it once did or perhaps ever did. And so for them, they're going exploring incognito or anonymous social networks where they can truly say what they want to say or truly share how they feel or whatever it might be. So we saw social websites like Whisper, and that's the growth of Snapchat and all these other Yik Yak, right? We all know the infamous Yik Yak. Those were all platforms that were really gravitated towards the emerging generation for that same idea of looking for more authentic connections. So bottom line here, Generation Z, they respond to honest, transparent, and authentic messaging. If you're out there trying to recruit this generation, think about that. If you're out there trying to, if you're creating any type of internal communications with this generation, obviously keep all that in mind as well. 2013, she starts bumping into more social network tools. She she's now old enough to jump on Twitter, so she decides to start a Twitter account. That's when the App Store, Apple's App Store, was announced. And if you think about the App Store, it really created this innovation hotbed to where this generation could really innovate and create and put something out into the world. And then she jumps on Tumblr and begins blogging. She begins putting out her own thoughts and opinions on different topics. And she's, of course, still actively engaging with Snapchat as well. So the bottom line, the takeaway here is Generation Z leveraged the internet to contribute, be heard, and hack work life. All right, 2015, she is just about to creep into, she's now a freshman, I guess, in college right around this time. And she's just now exploring LinkedIn. This generation is looking at the research, they're wanting to start their careers earlier, as we discussed earlier. And one of the pieces that really kind of confirms this is recently LinkedIn changed their minimum age. Does anyone want to take a guess what the minimum age is to join LinkedIn? 16, good guess. 14 is the correct answer. Yeah, 14 years old to jump on LinkedIn. And so I think that is a testament to this generation wanting to create a brand, a professional brand, and begin working as soon as they can. So what we learn here is Generation Z expect a short work tenure, much like Millennials, and strive to gain transferable skills. Again, they have this idea of FOMO, so they're wanting to roll hop. They're wanting to gain more skills and to constantly poke at new opportunities to see what they like and what might be a good fit for them. 2016, Jennifer Zahn she's bumps into Kickstarter, and Kickstarter is, for those that may not know, it's a website where you can go and share an innovation or a business idea or an idea for a new product or an invention, and you can get people to donate money for you to then create that product or service, perhaps. And Indiegogo is another website out there. Crowdsourcing is a general term for what Kickstarter is. But again, it's a confirmation. She's now old enough to where she can actually jump on there and actually share her ideas and perhaps get funding for it. Shows like Shark Tank are gaining a lot of traction. So again, she's bumping into entrepreneurship and innovation on every turn of her life and wherever she goes as she's thinking about her career. So what we learned from this is Generation Z place a premium on entrepreneurship, innovation, and do-it-yourself, DIY. DIY is something that really, if I could say one word that might describe this generation, I think it would be do-it-yourself. They are empowered generation, and they're going to be competitive. They're going to look at different ways in which they could do it themselves. All right, 2017. Technology continues to influence her behavior and continues to influence how she communicates and how she interacts with her friends. So things like Netflix and Amazon, well, it's created an on-demand generation, right? No longer do I have to wait for it. Part of the reason that we're going to be agitated, or maybe are agitated with Generation Z, is because we're going to tell them, yeah, we used to have to go into Blockbuster Video. We had to drive there, walk in, look for a VHS, one that we wanted, and then we took up the, I don't know what they call it. It was just like the promotional piece, right? And you looked at it, the case, yeah, of course, the case. And you took, a few of them off, and then, there wasn't anything behind there, so it's all rented out. So you're thinking, oh my gosh, I gotta wait 2 weeks before I can see this video. But now you contrast that with Generation Z, and their pain point is they're going to jump on Netflix and see that buffering sign, and they're going to be like, I got to wait 2 seconds to see this video, right? So they're never going to know how easy they have it. But that's the difference between going down to the store, realizing it's not there, versus the buffering symbol. Okay, ha ha ha. Good joke. Okay, Snapchat, of course, is influencing her behavior. So just think about this for a second. So I'm curious, how many of you in here are on Snapchat? 30% of you? It doesn't really bother me if you are or aren't, but here's what's interesting. Snapchat is the fastest growing social network out there. Over 60% of Generation Z and Millennials are on it, and they communicate on average 11 times a day via Snapchat. And so Snapchat is, it's an augmented reality platform. It's, you can communicate face-to-face, you can send videos, you can actually send money from peer-to-peer via the Snapchat application. And it's also the platform in which they are consuming their information, their media, right? There's ESPN's got a channel, CNN's got a channel on Snapchat. And it's probably one of the most highly coveted platforms to market on. So when you have a highly dynamic communication tool like that you're communicating with on 11 times a day, do you think when Generation Z steps into the classroom or steps into the workplace, do you think the old communication methods like email are going to be attractive to this generation? Probably not, which is why we're seeing the growth of Slack, which is a cloud-based collaboration tool. And the whole goal, the CEO's goal of Slack, the CEO of Slack, his goal is to eradicate email. So he just doesn't want no more email. Because we've all been on those chains with emails, right, where it just seems like it never ends. And it's just not a productive tool anymore. I think it'll be a while before it goes away because your email address is the gateway to the internet, right? We all use our email address to create profiles, LinkedIn, Facebook, banks, whatever it might be. So it's going to take a while, but I think we all collectively are feeling this tension that, hey, email might have run its course. And so now we're going to start seeing more and more collaboration tools like Slack cropping up, and we're going to see more and more of the emerging generation really grasping those platforms to be more efficient and effective at the workplace. Question over there? No? Okay. And then, of course, Airbnb and Uber, they've really created a generation that appreciates the share economy. Why do I need to own when I can share? We were talking earlier at lunch that we're seeing more and more of this emerging generation just not caring about getting a driver's license. Have some of you noticed this? Some of you are shaking your heads. Yeah, I mean, a lot of that's, again, because we have services like Uber, but again, why do I need to leave my house when I can Skype my friends, right? And we can be in the same room together. So whether that irritates you or not, it's a reality, and so we got to figure out, what does that mean? How do we need to lead or communicate around that? So all things that we need to be aware of. So bottom line here, Generation Z, the workplace and marketplace expectations they have will continue to be shaped by technology. The bottom line here is that technology has created new behaviors that have never existed before. It's happening with all of us, but it's showing up earlier in the emerging generations. And so technology is creating new behaviors, new values. It's creating new expectations that have never existed before. And it's showing up earlier in the emerging generations. And really, behaviors are rippling up. Have you noticed this? Behaviors are rippling up these days. I won't have you raise your hand. I think I asked the morning crowd this. Don't raise your hand, but I bet at one point you knew somebody who told themselves or told someone else they would never join Facebook because it was for the kids, right? I'm not joining that. That's for the kids. And yet now, a lot of us, in fact, 2 out of 7 people on the planet use Facebook. And a lot of us probably swore off emojis or wrote off emojis like, that is a childish thing to send to somebody. Why would you ever email? Why would you ever fax an emoji to somebody? Why would you ever text an emoji to someone? Now I bet all of you have texted somebody an emoji probably a couple times this week, right? And so more and more of the behaviors that are starting younger and younger are rippling up. It's this really weird thing that's happening. But again, I think it's because of this special day and age that we're now living in. All right, lastly, Jennifer's on. She's now entering the workplace. By 2020, she's going to be settling into her career. And here's the bottom line. They're going to be self-starters, self-learners, and they're going to be self-motivated, and they will forever change the world of work. We talked a little bit about work-life balance. I mean, they're going to push the boundaries as to what a traditional 9-to-5 looks like. They're going to be pushing the boundaries as to what flexible work looks like, pushing the boundaries on communication. So we got to be ready. We got to encourage part of it, and we also have to guide a lot of it as well. So here's just an overview. Again, you guys can have all these slides, so if you feel like this was helpful, you can just print off that one slide or take a picture of that one and kind of use that as a reference. All right, so we talked a lot about Generation Z and who they were. Now we're going to step into, I'm going to give you 4 ideas on how to engage this generation. But before I go there, what questions on Gen Z's story? Or any other comments that you'd like to add? I'm always enjoy hearing those. Yes? Yep. Yeah, good question. So the question was, is how global is this? In my morning session, we talked about that really the Generation Z and Millennials are the first global generations. And the statistic is that 58% of people over the age of 35 agree that kids today have more in common with their global peers than they do with folks in their own country. So meaning a 18-year-old here in Lexington would have more in common with an 8-year-old in India than they do with someone who's 60 or 65 and lives down the street from them for their whole life. So yes, this generation has more in common with their global peers than any other generation before them. And so a lot of what we're talking about is US based, but no, if you have interactions with Generation Z that extends across borders or territories, a lot of what we're talking about is going to be similar. And again, as we mentioned earlier too, the X factor is the connectivity. So I can see an event that happened in your country, you can see an event that happened in my country, we might be able to jump on a forum and talk about it together. You know, I might mention something when I'm playing with you on an online game. So there's a lot more transparent communications, but thanks for bringing that up. And yes, a lot of synergies across the globe. What other questions, comments? Yes? Right. Right. Yeah. Sounds like every team I was a part of in my university experience. Yeah, I fell in between all of it. Good. So the question is, if I may summarize, how does teamwork pan out? How is Generation Z going to view teamwork? How that might play out? The short answer is too early to tell. We certainly know that they value it. They understand the power behind teamwork, but it's too early to tell how the dynamic's going to play out in the workplace. But I think when they're starting to come in more and more, because we were talking to Tim Tracy this morning. He was saying your freshman, this is the first, your freshman class is essentially the first Generation Z class. And it was really interesting talking with Tim. He was saying that he can see a distinct difference between the seniors and the freshmen, which I thought was really fascinating. So he was really saying there is a difference with this Generation Z group. But I think so. There's still a lot to play out there. But I think the big thing to keep an eye on is the do-it-yourself mentality. They have all the tools, right, to go find out answers and to go seek out answers to problem solve, whatever it might be. So I think where they're going to want to collaborate is before and after projects. Let's collaborate before and try to figure out what the idea is, what the direction is. Then let's all go in our separate ways and find the right answers, and then let's come back and again collaborate and listen to everyone's ideas. So I think that's going to be an element we should keep an eye on. And then I think too, they're going to be just as hungry as millennials to contribute. So they're going to come into an organization, come into the classroom, and be eager to contribute because they've been contributing on Twitter, Facebook, Snapchat as far back as they can remember. So yeah, they're going to come together in a team or a department and say, hey, I can do this. I'm happy to contribute and contribute towards the team as well. So I think those are all elements that will play out as far as Generation Z as it comes to teamwork. Yes? Yeah, totally. I think as soon as you said that, I thought about like all of the Marvel and DC comic movies that are so popular, right? And each individual has their role to play, their specific strength. And I'm sure that's something, whether they know it or not, will probably be impacting this generation that, hey, if I want to do something great, I need to know I need to be really self-aware of what my skill sets are and what I can bring to a team. That's great. Did you have a question or a comment? Yeah, so she's asking about what happens with the service industries. We also got this question in the morning session too about more trade-specific roles. What's going to happen there? Because yeah, I mean, I think that the natural is we kind of gravitate towards the technology. One, because we just get dopamine squirts every time we turn on our laptops, right? And we're constantly just like our brains lighting up, right? So it is very addictive and it's easy to draw us in. And then two, yeah, why would I want to go work outside in hot or cold weather when I could get a job in an office and be behind a laptop or something. So yeah, organizations are trying to unpack this. They're trying to figure it out because there is a shortage in the labor market when it comes to some of these jobs, and whether it be service or in more of some of the, whether it be welding or electricians or anything else. And so the example I used this morning, which I think is probably the best example, is it's really, it's up to organizations to really make it more appealing for them to come work for these organizations that have jobs like that. And so they're focused on things like how do we really bring them into organizations that are hyper-focused on development. So they're not only going to be trained to be an electrician, but they can also be trained on better public speaking or how to fill in the blank. And so they're using development as a way to attract this generation, but also keep them in those roles. And they're also doing things like they're trying to give them more exposure to the whole landscape of the industry. So one company that we recently did some work with, they're called Power Design. They're rated one of the best workplaces, I think in New York is where they're based. And they have this, what they call a career advancement process. So they have electricians that are coming into their organizations, but so they're training them on the art and everything they need to know to be an electrician, but then they're also giving them taste and insights into everything else around a certain project. And so here's all the other elements, here's other things to think about. Kind of goes back to that idea of teamwork, is they're trying to help them understand what unique skill set they have or what phase in the project might they be able to lend the best work. And so they're trying to really bait them with experiences like that, development like that, to bring them in and keep them there as well. So I think a lot of folks like that, a lot of industries like that are trying to still find the silver bullet. Of course, there's not a silver bullet, and I think it's just something we need to keep in the back of our heads. And the other aspect that we talked about this morning was about robotics and AI, and how is that going to perhaps change those industries as well. And I think it will change it. At some point, robots are going to be doing all the jobs that none of us want to do, and that's going to change how we perceive work and how we, perhaps the 9 to 5 and everything else. But I think it'll be a while, so that in the interim, we need to find ways to get people interested in those roles, put value on those roles, and not just devalue them or sweep them under the rug. So long story short, I don't know. How about that? I don't know, but hopefully those are some good things to think about. What else? Any other questions before we keep moving here? Comment, please. Let me give you this mic real quick. Yeah.
My son is 22, he has a lot of online games that, that Chris was talking about, he has people all over the world who can start that and play it. And his colleague was like, he was talking about it, he said, such a different skill set. And I said, the thing is, he didn't know before him, he was on gaming.
Wow.
The skill of that is something
Wow. Totally. Thank you. Yeah, I think, and I might start putting this, giving you guys, I think there's another mic over here. So if you have a comment, maybe I'll give you this other mic. Cool. Yeah, that's great. I mean, I think, and that's one of the pitfalls of generations, right, is we tend to dismiss what we don't understand. And this morning we talked a lot about unconscious bias, and that's a real thing, right? Again, we showed you that statistic that 52% of workers are least likely to get along with someone from a different generation. So generation's the top on the list. It trumps race, ethnicity, background, geography, any other diversity metric you can think of. Generations is causing the most friction. And a lot of it's unconscious, right? We can't put our finger on why I'm not seeing eye to eye to this person. And it stems from a lot of what you just said, is I don't understand how you can establish a relationship with someone you've never met, right? For a generation that didn't grow up doing that, or that's not native to them, it's really easy for us to dismiss that or not understand it or say, you'll grow out of that, right? But we gotta be careful about doing that because the world's changed. And so we have to be aware of these tendencies and some of these things. And we've just got to be open about it and talking about it. And that's the beautiful thing about generations, is we can talk about it very openly. It's one of the few diversity metrics that we all are comfortable as a society and culture to talk about. So that's kind of the hidden gem there with generations. But the more we know, the easier we can kind of navigate and overcome some of the pitfalls and friction. Yeah, another question? Yep. Sure. Right. 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 Oh, big money. Yeah, there's 12-year-olds that make millions in their underwear just gaming on Xbox. Of course, yeah, it's big. I mean, they fill arenas, right? And then the other big growing trend, right, is drone racing. There's now leagues where people race drones. Maybe some of you have seen that on TV. And TBS is now broadcasting esports. So it's a growing trend. But I think it's a good example, whether you like gaming or not, of yeah, don't be so quick to dismiss some of the disruption and the things that the emerging generations are doing. I think a better approach is to become a practitioner, right? Start poking at it, trying to understand what it is and how it's going to shape who they become and how they perceive certain things. Another kind of similar along these lines is, maybe some of you have young kids have seen this. There's a trend now where kids will watch other kids on YouTube play with toys. Some of you, yes? Who heard this? I don't even know if there's an official name. Yeah, so young children, actually, the most watched kids YouTube channel is just someone else who plays with kids' toys, and kids will watch other kids playing with toys. It seems bonkers, right? You're like, wow, why would you ever want to do that? Well, it's the same concept here with Twitch. Other people are watching other people game. And so, yeah, interesting. And we're all shaking our heads, I know. I'm now included. There you go. That's interesting. Yeah. We watch it, yeah. Okay, that's interesting insight. Yeah. I think with what's that? What's that? Does it take physical talent to game? Well, the Olympic Committee is just now discussing that, so we shall see. Yeah. Yes, question or comment? Mm. Right. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of problem solving that happens in gaming as well, right? I know there's studies too where it improves eye-hand coordination. So there's doctors that'll have gone through it, and it improves eye-hand coordination. But it's also, I think it's a breadcrumb. We're talking a lot about gaming. I think it's a breadcrumb leading up to more augmented and virtual reality experiences as well, right? We're just on the verge of this. Maybe some of you saw Mark Zuckerberg announced, I think it was a week or two, or 1 or 2 weeks ago, the Oculus Go, which is now a wireless virtual reality headset, and it's going to be really affordable. And so their goal was, I think, to have 1 billion people involved in virtual reality, I think in the next few years, perhaps. So it's going to be here before we know it. And there's more organizations that are using it now, too. I bet at some of your career fairs, if you haven't been to one lately, there might be some virtual reality headsets, right? So corporations are using it for candidates that come up and say, hey, what's it like to work at your organization? They say, well, I don't want to tell you. Take a look. And they'll put on the headset, and they can actually look around and see what it would look like to work at that organization. Other companies are using it for training purposes. If we can't get everyone in the same room, you can put on a headset, and you can feel like you're in the same room. So fully expect to see more augmented and virtual reality experiences coming very soon, whether we like it or not. All right, let's keep going, and then we'll have some more time for Q&A shortly. 91% of Generation Z said blank would impact their interest in working at a company. What do you think? All right, the correct answer is, congratulations, 16% of you, technological sophistication. There's a truth to a lot of those, though, right? I mean, I could probably argue, maybe not proximity to Starbucks so much, but yep, here we go. Some of you are chiming in with the wrong answer. Some of you said, no, I do not want the right answer to this. Thank you very much. I'm going to take back my response. And some of you still, even some of you from this morning probably think this isn't live, but you're testing it right now. All right. So what we're talking about, technological sophistication, obviously innovation. If we think back to Jennifer Zahn and her timeline, she's seeking innovation, right? It's been in their DNA as far back as they can remember. So the first idea I want to share with you is this idea of entrepreneurship. Infuse entrepreneurship. So it's this idea. Entrepreneurship is the idea of acting like an entrepreneur inside a larger organization. So how, and this probably is a good example for the teamwork question you had, is how can we give them more leash? How can we create more margin for them to flex their innovation muscles, for them to take their fresh perspectives and push the envelope inside of our organizations? So the bottom line here is the permission and power to innovate will engage Generation Z. So this is a chart that I showed at the beginning in our morning session. I'm not going to go through it all again, but I want to just turn your attention to the right-hand side. That's Millennials, and I lumped in Generation Z because the older Generation Zs are going to have a lot of these similar looking for, in demand. It's going to be constant and continuous. And for them, they're going to, we talked about this before, should I be thinking about other education alternatives moving forward? So as we talk about learning, we think about learning, I want to give you a couple more statistics on how interested in a situation in which they could. Lastly, 73% would like to be taught one-on-one. So it's becoming individualized. I recently spoke at a training conference, and the gentleman before me was the CEO of trainingindustry.com. They do a publication, whatever not, but basically his primary message was, when it comes to training, and this is more in the workplace and industry, the classroom is turning into a class size of 1. More and more of the class size is coming down to 1. And so I think there's a lot of synergies as it relates to when you think about your role here at the university, and this certainly proves it as well, is, hey, with a very customizable life that I've had, I'm looking for more customized, individualized learning. All right, so the best idea or something to just chew on here would be to teach and train adaptively. The information age has individualized the classroom, and achieving agility in order to respond to the individualized learner is really important. So we just need to constantly be coming to sessions like this, thinking about, discussing, trying to expand, talking to Generation Z. What is it that you're looking for? How can we help? What else should we be thinking about? I think pushing the envelope needs to happen more frequently than ever before, and hopefully I'm making a compelling case this morning and today as to why that might be the case. All right, 64% of Generation Z cited blank as a top career priority. All right. By the career path. So remember I said that gaming is very engaging for end users, right? That's why it's so popular. It really engages you as a player. And so there's a lot of retention, engagement strategies we can pull from looking at games and gamification, essentially. So number one, offer options. Well, that's what games offer, right? I have the option of choosing my avatar or perhaps customizing my character. I can choose certain paths that I want to go on a game. Provide hints. Well, when you come to an obstacle in a game and you can't overcome that obstacle, more than likely you're going to get fed a hint that allows you to overcome that obstacle, thus keeping you more engaged, ultimately with the organization or within the university. So how can you, as a leader, as an institution, how can you find or help this emerging generation help pull out what some of their strengths might be? How can you help guide them into what career paths they should be thinking about? Deliver training. Obviously, that's pretty self-explanatory for this group. And inside organizations, constantly delivering on-demand mobile micro-training. And then perhaps this is the most interesting, I think, is highlighting the progress. Why so many people come back to games and get so immersed in games is because of the progress bar. It's very clear as to where you start, how far you've come, and how far you have left to go. If you can create that visual for the students inside in your university, or create that for your teams, that is a huge win, especially for this emerging generation. They're looking for that transparency, and they're also looking for a reason to say, this is why I should stay here, because look how far I've come, and they've identified I can also do all these other things. This is exciting. So gamify the career path where you can. All right, this is a fun one. What was the Oxford Dictionary's word of the year in 2015? Was it meme, FOMO, YOLO, a GIF? Was it an actual GIF or GIF of Beyonce's Lemonade? Was it an emoji, or was it the word yas? Yas. So this is a real thing. Oxford Dictionary actually does a word of the year every year. So this is interesting. Everyone thinks it's YOLO. I'm not sure where YOLO started or even how old it is. That is not the right answer. The correct answer is the emoji. The emoji. That was Oxford Dictionary's word of the year. Go look it up. Yeah, exactly. How is that a word? That's why you're all scratching your head. That's why I use it, because it is controversial. It's not a word. How can it be the word of the year if it's not a word? But it's it's specifically this emoji. This is the crying tears of joy face, I think is what they call it. But it's an illustration of how in culture in our society, we're moving towards visuals, right? And as humans, we're visual beings. If I say pink elephant, none of you are thinking the letters P-I-N-K. No, you're actually visualizing a pink elephant. So we are natural, just visual beings. And so the reason why emojis and why more and more video is become prevalent is because we're visual beings. So yes, it's an emoji. Look it up. 93% of Generation Z said they visit YouTube at least once a week, and 54% visit the site multiple times throughout the day. They have a strong appetite for videos. And hack your own behavior. If you had the option of reading an article online versus consuming that same information via a video, I bet 8 out of 10 of you would probably click on that video versus reading that article. For a couple reasons. Number one, you're probably interested in the visuals. Number two, you could click that video and then do something else because you're still getting the audio, right? You're essentially getting read the content. So there's a couple different reasons why we would choose video, and certainly the emerging generation is all in with video. So bottom line here, use visuals and video, or at anything possible. Any of your communications to this generation has to be highly visual, highly, I would say choose video, and then also know that it has to be mobile friendly. Anything you're sending to this generation has to look good on a mobile device, because if it doesn't, they're not consuming it. So it has to be mobile first. You've got to think mobile first. And if you're sending communications out to Generation Z, send it to yourself first and pull it up on your own mobile device and figure out, am I scrolling too much? Do I have to pinch and zoom? That's a terrible experience. And if a Generation Z has to pinch and zoom, that's not happening, right? They're on to something else. It's not because they're terrible beings. It's just because they have different expectations, and we have to meet them if we're going to spend the time creating information that they should consume. So help Generation Z visualize themselves at your university. I'll tell you a little bit about that example here in just a minute. Ensure all content is as digitally native as they are. Whatever it is that you're creating for them to consume, it should look like something that they would naturally consume in their news feed, whether that be Facebook, Twitter, Snapchat. And so that's another reason to be involved in some of these platforms, so you have an idea of some of the messaging, the design, or whatever something else it might be that's really being actively consumed by this generation. So let me give you a little bit more, because I think the visuals and video are really important. The top 3 things that next generation want to know about an organization: they want to know the culture and values, perks and benefits, and the employee perspectives. And I bet that's really similar for folks trying to choose a university, what university to come to school with, right? They're wanting to know, what's it like here? Same thing here. Top obstacle the next generation has for accepting a job is not knowing what the company's like. So these should not be tough challenges to overcome in the digital world, in the very video-friendly world that you and I now live in. So SAP recently, they understood these trends, so they went and hired a videographer and created 40 videos that highlighted the company's culture and values, the perks and benefits, and they had all employees, actual employees inside the organization, telling their real stories and their real experiences of what it's like to work there. And they've got really strong YouTube channels on that paint the picture of what it looks like to work at SAP. And then Zendesk, they have a great recruiting video. Job. If you actually know, you're going, great, what are you going to do there? And they go, I don't know. Aren't you supposed to get a job first and then go? They're like, I don't know. No, I mean, I have a supercomputer in my pocket. I think I can figure it out when I get there. So that's a dynamic that's changed, right? And the connected world we live in, we don't have to be in the same spot to do the work that we do, for a lot of us. So Zendesk understood that trend, so they knew that, hey, not only is the next generation going to choose our company because of our culture and values, but they're actually choosing the city. And so they showed the culture and values, perks and benefits, employee perspectives, but then they took it one step further in the recruiting video, and they actually showcased the city in which folks would come work in. So they showcased the coffee shops, the bars, the restaurants, the concert venues. And so really they're trying to help this emerging generation see themselves in this city, and ultimately then seeing themselves working at Zendesk, which is I think it's an HR software company. So I think that's a huge nugget for anyone involved in recruiting, because again, we got to help them visualize being here, and then half of it is where they're actually located, right? In what city they're in or they're around. All right, so there's my 4 ideas. I know our time is limited. Don't forget, there's my email. If you guys have any emails, right? If you have any emails, email me. That didn't make sense. If you have any questions, email me. However I can help, let me know. And I am a millennial, but I respond to email, I promise. And don't forget, all the slides are at that link. And if you're interested in any more strategies as it relates to leading the emerging generation, I know this is the Millennial Manual. These strategies are going to work for at least the first few Generation Zers. That is a resource for everyone as well. We just have a few minutes. I'll take 1 or 2 questions. Or did you have a comment? Yeah. Is it not? Okay. Okay. Yeah, okay. It's working for me right now, so I think it's good. But if not, if you're having other issues, send me an email. Yes, let's do you, and then we'll grab your question. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Mm. workplace. There's statistics out there saying that over 80% of gamers fail. They like fail 80% of the time, but will constantly come back and constantly keep pushing through it to overcome. But yet it doesn't seem to translate as well in the real world, which is really fascinating. Because it's not real, but I still think there's a certain level of wanting to overcome something, and why isn't that translating into the real world? And I think we had this conversation a little bit at lunch as well, and it's just how do we start creating more environments where they can fail in a more in an easier capacity, I guess. And I think oftentimes I work with a lot of organizations. Of course, these are younger millennials, but oftentimes they're saying, hey, as the manager inside an organization, I'm the first one that is having to help them through a failure. They just haven't had it in the past. And so don't be surprised if that's you. If you're having to help some of your students or employees through a failure for the first time. So it's a tremendous opportunity to help that individual, but I understand that not all of us have time to be that probably should have been mom and dad that helped them with that. But just know that that might be something that you probably interact with or engage with or come into face-to-face with more than probably in the past. In the interest of time, I think I'll leave it there. And I'm going to have to think on that because that's some good insights you brought up there. Last question, and then I'm going to wrap up with a quick story. Yes? Yeah. Yep. No, please. Ah, sure. Sure. Yep. Right. Yeah. She's also my teen. Yeah. So it's I get the reason I say this book will apply because I guess I think of it is for Generation Zers that might be coming in as an internship, right? A lot of strategies we talk about there can be applied to them because they're going to have a lot of similar tendencies as the younger millennials. Yeah. So a couple things to think about, yeah, and then because it's a valid question, and generations are typically 15 to 20 year spans. We talked about this a little bit this morning, right? That I think the millennials could be split into two generations. I mean, 20 to 36, that's a big range, and 21-year-old's gonna have different values, expectations, behavior than a 34-year-old will, right? So part of it, they're clues, not absolutes. You also have to factor in life stage. A 25-year-old that's married and has 3 kids is going to have much different priorities than a 25-year-old who's single, right? So you've got to factor that in as well. So I know it's sometimes it can be frustrating painting such a broad stroke, but a lot of the undercurrent here is really that things are shifting. All our behaviors are changing, but it's really we can see a lot of the change happening sooner in these emerging generations. And you're right. I think probably if I came back this time next year, there would probably be a lot of changes to that Generation Z timeline and the year next after that. So I think generations could be as short as 5-year spans. And that's how diverse and things are going to be changing so rapidly. So yeah, clues, not absolutes. And certainly, take into consider life stages. And yeah, I think one of the biggest things too, if you want to learn about Generation Z, is talk to them. Get to know them, ask the right questions, ask a lot of questions, and don't assume, don't brush anything off. Really understand who and why they're doing some of the things they're doing. I like to snoop in airports, right? Someone's like on their phone, I'm like looking like, what is that app? And like, how are they using it? And how quickly are they consuming information? And there's a lot of things, and we just have to be students of all the change that are happening around us. And hopefully that's kind of actually that's a good segue into my last story here. And so we're talking about change, right? We're talking a lot about change. The undercurrent to all of this is change. And I want to share this final story with you. It's called Autobiography in 5 Short Chapters, and it's on my phone. I'm not finally Snapchatting. And so it goes through the stages of change that we need to go through, right? We live in exponential times. Change is going to be coming at us faster than we ever thought possible and that we would ever want, because as humans, we resist change, right? Change is something that we don't willingly go after. We like improvements, but we don't necessarily want change. So this is a humorous yet inspiring story about how we can all navigate change successfully. So think about, after today's 3 sessions, think about where you might be on these 5 stages and how you might get to the next stage. So chapter number 1, I walk down the street, there's a deep hole in the sidewalk. I fall in, I am lost, I am helpless. It isn't my fault, it takes forever to find a way out. Phase 1 of change is ignorance. So might you be ignorant to some of these generational challenges that you heard today and that you're going to continue to hear in the next few days? Chapter 2, I walk down the street, there's a deep hole in the sidewalk. I pretend I don't see it. I fall in again. I can't believe I'm in the same place, but it isn't my fault. It still takes a long time to get out. Some of you are going to pretend you saw none of this presentation, right? So you're just going to be like, nope, denied. Don't do that. Do not do that. Phase 2 of change is denial. That's why you won't want to do it. Chapter 3, I walk down the same street. There's a deep hole in the sidewalk. I see it there. I still fall in. It's a habit. You know, how many habits, how many of us are guilty of legacy thinking, right? Hanging on to things because they should always be this way or what have you. But my eyes are open. I know where I am. It is my fault. I get out immediately. Phase 3 of change is responsibility. Chapter 4, I walk down the same street. There's a deep hole in the sidewalk. I walk around it. Phase 4 of change is resolve. And finally, chapter 5, I walk down another street. Phase 5 of change is progress. So with that in mind, it is my sincere goal for you and for me that we find those new streets and we all decide to walk boldly down them. Thanks for having me, guys. Appreciate it. Cheers.